Okay. Okay, so just getting started here. Excuse me while I'm just setting up. Just give me 1 second and then we'll be on our way. Just getting my water ready. And all right, so I'm a little bit under the weather. It's not too bad, but maybe my nose is a little bit stuffed up, so I'll definitely do my best. But if my voice sounds a little bit funny today, I apologize. Also, is the sound okay? If the sound is a little bit faulty, please let me know, and I'll do my best to change it. But I think everything is looking good on my end. And if so, I guess we can be on our way. It's 6 o'clock, but let's give it another minute or so, and then we'll just get going. So anyway, just I hope things are well. And yeah, I just woke up, so not just maybe I woke up about 35 minutes ago, 40 minutes ago. And usually with these things, I'm usually okay. But this morning I feel a little bit, not completely under the weather, but just a little bit. It was a little bit harder for me, a little bit more difficult for me to get up out of bed than usual. But I still managed. So, but anyway. Okay, so let's just give it another minute here. And this week will be KWAIDAN. This is the 1965 film KWAIDAN here, and I have the Blu-ray here. And let's see, this is the older Criterion DVD. I know it does appear on other labels and in other places, but I will be relying on my viewing of this version, the 100, it's called the 183-minute version, which is the long, the original cut of the film, as it were. So we'll be getting going right now. Well, I guess we can start. So anyway, my friends, welcome to another live stream film club. My name is Daisuke, and greetings from Tokyo. It's very nice to see you, and I hope all of you are doing very, very well today. So it will be my pleasure today to share with you some thoughts that I have about this film KWAIDAN, which is from 1965, Masaki Kobayashi. It's an anthology film. Let's call it for now an anthology horror film, although I think as we go along, I would like to suggest that perhaps this is not necessarily a horror film, but perhaps, although there are horror elements to the film, I would like to suggest that there are a lot of other things going on that might suggest other genres, perhaps, but we'll see. But let's call it a horror film for now. It's an anthology film. The 183-minute version is what I'd like to focus on here, and such version consists of four different stories. So each about, oh gosh, maybe, how does that come out? About 45 minutes or so, maybe less for some, but this is the way it's set up. So we've got the four stories here, and there doesn't seem to be, at least at first glance, there doesn't seem to be any kind of wraparound story. There doesn't seem to be any sort of prologue and epilogue to tie in the stories. It's just the opening credits, and it goes straight into the first story, and once the first story ends, it's the second story, and once the second story ends, I think there is an intermission, and then once the intermission ends, it abruptly goes into the third story, and then the fourth story, and then the ending. So there doesn't seem to be any kind of surface level connector to the film. So it's just a straightforward presentation of four seemingly separate stories. They aren't connected in terms of narrative, right? There doesn't seem to be any through line in terms of any character that appears in more than one story or anything like that. There is a narrator, but the narrator is very anonymous and doesn't necessarily call attention to himself. So I suppose apart from the narrator, there isn't any other kind of direct surface level connective element to these four stories. But that's another thing I'd like to try to touch upon today, if I may, which is how these stories are connected, right? I mean, we are watching four separate, distinct narrative little short stories, granted, but I would like to think that maybe I'm forcing this on the film as I watch it, perhaps, in my need to try to see some kind of order, perhaps. Perhaps there isn't any connection, thematic or metaphorical or otherwise, but I actually think that there are. So there might be some room for discussion there as well. So that's what I'd like to try to discuss as well. And also I'd like to try to discuss what we as viewers perceive to be the cinematic tools and tricks and skills and presentation styles that are employed both visually and through sound and the like. What things that we see, what aspects of cinematic technique that we can identify as viewers, that we can see that contribute to our reactions to the film, whatever they be, whatever those reactions might be, whether they be feelings of dread, feelings of horror and being repulsed, or maybe feelings of sadness, feelings of maybe pathos, feelings of comedy, perhaps, or just perplexity or things like that. How does the film and its cinematic techniques, as we can identify them, how does the film get to us? How does the film cause its effect upon us? Okay. And then, if I have time, I'd like to talk briefly about other things about this film and how those other things, the other sort of non-genre elements of this film, as it were, how those elements might be seen to be ways in which the filmmaker, Kobayashi, seems to be speaking to us in terms of a sort of social criticism. Whether it's there or not, let's try to discuss and see what we can come up with. But remember who Kobayashi the filmmaker is. You know, he is a filmmaker that, based on his filmography, is one who has a lot of things to say about Japanese power structures and corruption and a lot of things to say, a lot of criticisms to say about how those power structures led Japan into war and the military, let's call it the military complex for now. But he has spoken about this thing, these aspects, quite vehemently in other films, most notably in the long film, which is considered by many, I think rightly so, myself included, to be his sort of magnum opus, Human Condition. There's also Harakiri as well, which is also very, very famous. In many respects, perhaps at first glance, KWAIDAN might be seen to be quite different from Kobayashi's other works in his filmography, but I would like to suggest that even at first glance those differences might exist. There could still be some elements that we can try to connect with certain aspects outside of the quote-unquote horror genre that might lead us into a more general discussion about how this film might fit in to the filmography of Kobayashi. So that's generally where I'd like to go today. And so if you don't mind, let us commence this film club live stream discussion. So just a few housekeeping comments out of the way. This is going to be a discussion of KWAIDAN, and so you are more than welcome. You are obviously very welcome to make comments in the live chat. I see that there are already a number of people here, which is wonderful. It's lovely to see this. So it's nice to see people already chatting, and so that makes me very happy. And so I will be doing my very best over the course of this live stream to address any comments or questions that you might have with respect to KWAIDAN. And of course, you can always have discussions among each other, and hopefully you can meet old friends and hopefully make some new ones along the way. So that's one of the objectives of this, I hope, is to allow people to discuss films and to maybe meet old friends and new friends. So but I will be doing my best to address as many of the comments as possible. Please forgive me because I might not necessarily get to your comment during the live stream. And if so, I apologize. It's not anything that has to do with you. It is all to do with me. What's the phrase? It's not you, it's me. So I would just ask for your understanding. I'm just doing the very best I can here, so and sometimes that's not good enough, but I'm still doing the very best, so I'll try to keep up with all the comments going forward. But if I do unintentionally overlook your comment, please forgive me. But also I must say that I will be skipping over any comments that I see that don't have anything to do with the film KWAIDAN. This is not meant to be a general film discussion. I'm not prepared to make any comments outside of the discussion of KWAIDAN. And so if I see a comment directed at me, asking me a question that is not related to KWAIDAN, if you don't mind, thank you very much for the question, but if you don't mind, I will very politely or do my best to skip over that, and you can always leave the question in another video and I will do my best to respond as best as I can. Also, I should say that I am in no way, of course, associated with the film KWAIDAN and its production. I would never made the film. I wasn't involved in the film. I haven't studied this film as an academic, so I don't hold any expertise, and I am not in any way a scholar, and I haven't studied keenly up on this film. But I do know this film as an admirer of this film from afar. And so that's how I will be approaching my comments here today to the best of my ability. I will be relying in some part on some of the comments that were made by the participants in, for instance, some of the supplements in the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, which is right here, and which is spine number 90, yes, in the Criterion Collection. And so that's what my general approach is. But I'm not here to, I don't have all the answers with respect to this and all the specific details with the production. So if you are looking for any specific details going forward, might I suggest that if no answers to your questions emerge during this live stream, which is indeed very possible, then I would suggest, as a starting point, going to some of the supplements here. For instance, the great, really detailed audio commentary by Stephen Prince, which is included as an optional soundtrack here. I would strongly recommend going there, and yes, just that would be a nice starting point, a jumping off point, hopefully, for you and your further KWAIDAN studies. Okay, so with that in mind, let's begin in earnest. But let's just see, before we go, I'd like to just say a quick hello to everyone who has joined. So hello. Okay, so Jared, hello. It's nice to see you. Nazar and Prod, hello. Wolfret, hello. Yes. Jay, is it? Yes, we just met. So Jay, is it Betty or BT? Hello. It's nice to see you. Let's see. Jared says, wasn't able to watch the film in one going, but I saw it over the course of a few nights. I've been fairly busy this week and wasn't sure I'd be able to see the film. That's a really interesting comment. Yes, this is really great. And let's see. That's actually one thing I want to try to discuss, which is how to watch this film. Is it possible to watch this film over the course of many sittings instead of one sitting? I think that's possible. Is it also possible to watch the film in a different order, namely to watch the stories in an order other than the order in which they are presented, at least here, which is the black hair, Woman of the Snow, or Snow Woman, and Hoichi the Earless, or the story of Hoichi the Earless, and In a Cup of Tea. So it's in that order. So is it possible to watch them in a separate order? Stephen Prince in the commentary actually suggests, I think rather in a sort of off-the-cuff comment, that perhaps one might be able to see these films in a separate order, perhaps. It could be possible. Indeed, there was a cut of the film which is about an hour or 2 hour film, which I understand was prepared for the Cannes Film Festival at the time, and then also used for release in some overseas markets. But there was a cut of the film that actually excised the Snow Woman segment, and so you only had the 3 segments, which is an interesting concept. It seems to suggest that perhaps the order of the film, or the order of the stories, isn't necessarily set in stone. I don't know, but I would also suggest that, for one thing, I think Jared's approach is perfectly legitimate and fine, because it's a very long film and one doesn't necessarily, I mean, it would, of course, everyone understands, and I know everyone here understands it would be great to be able to sit through a 3 hour film uninterrupted, but life sometimes finds a way to interrupt, and it happens to me as well. So it's sometimes impossible, given our schedules, to sit through the film in its entirety, especially if we don't have much time in our work lives and stuff. So I understand that. As for the order of the films, and I know, Jared, you weren't speaking of this directly, but as for the order of the films, that is also something that I would like to try to talk about in terms of the thematic structure. And I do think there is a progression going on from the first film, the black hair segment, and then the Snow Woman segment, and then the Hoichi the Earless tale segment, and then finally the In a Cup of Tea. So I do think there is a progression, and I think the fact that the film ends with In a Cup of Tea, which is a very self-conscious work in that it is talking about a writer, and then it has 2 different timelines, right? There's the 1899 1900 timeline with the writer and the publisher and the wife, and then there's the fact that we then see the story that we understand the writer to have written but hadn't completed yet, or he left it incomplete, which is parallel to how the actual Lafcadio Hearn story appears, but the film takes liberties in trying to give us an ending. So that parallel timeline structure in the last film, and its self-conscious nature about putting a direct spotlight on the actual act of storytelling, and the fact that the storytelling element is so effective, at least that's how the film portrays it, that it goes so far as to be able to affect even the writer himself, and that's the very, I think it's the final punchline of the film, what happens to the writer at the end here. So I do think that there is a progression, and ending with a very highly self-conscious, almost meta approach to storytelling, like we saw in the last story, In a Cup of Tea, is actually the ideal place, in my view anyway, to end the work. and I'll talk about the other three in a minute. But sorry about that. But Jared, your great comment sort of got me going already. So I'm very sorry about that. Paula, hello. It's nice to see you. Let's see. And Tim, hello. Greetings from London. Greetings, my friend. I hope you're doing well. And let's see. Tim says KWAIDAN is an astonishing work of art. Yes, I do think it is. Yes, it is really great, from the visual style to the soundscape, the Toru Takemitsu. Oh gosh, that's a lot. There's a lot to talk about there. And the camera work, the Miyajima camera work, etc. Oh, there's so much to talk, and the colors. There's so much to talk about, the set design. And Tim says, I love Claudia Hearn's stories too. Yes. Oh, Asian movie enthusiast. Hello, my dear friend. Yes. Oh, thank you so much. As always, Eric at Asian Movie Enthusiast gives us so many great bits of knowledge here. It's great. So there were some other Japanese movies that adapted the story behind The Woman of the Snow. Yes, a few are Ghost Story of the Snow Witch from 1968, Snow Woman 2016. Both are good. Thank you so much. Yes, that's another question. The Woman of the Snow, or Snow Woman, is sometimes I have to figure out which is my favorite of the bunch of stories. Sometimes I sort of go back and forth, but I think more often than not, I usually find myself gravitating toward Woman of the Snow, or Snow Woman. I think that's maybe one of the strongest stories here. That's really great, with Tatsuya Nakadai, of course, and Keiko Kishi, of course. So but we'll talk about that further. But thank you very much, Asian Movie Enthusiast, my dear friend. Paul Emery, hello. It's nice to see you. Retro Player 72, it's nice to see you, my friend. Let's see. And then Paula, great. Paula actually asked the question. So which, she says, Hoichi the Earless was the longest in terms of length. And then you say, what story was everyone's favorite? Oh, that's great. So hopefully we can get we can get some ideas going from other people here. It's really wonderful. Great. So I'm seeing a lot of people. Mr. Dad, hello. I love your picture. That's a great picture. Let's see. And I see a lot of people here already. Just go, Melinda, our dear friend Melinda. It's nice to see you. And Teddy Slick. Hello, it's nice to see you. And you say, KWAIDAN was my introduction to Japanese cinema in general, will always be special. Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. That's really nice. I hope you're doing well. And JR62, hello. Saw 3 out of the 4 stores. I don't care about the 4th being spoiled. Yes, I think I've already spoiled it, so I'm already very sorry about that. But if you can, it's worth checking out. I will be talking about the 4th story as well. So it's a little bit tough, I think, because there are going to be 4 different narratives, and so I'm going to try to go back and forth as much as possible. But this is great. Okay, so why don't we, I'm going to just pause here for the comments now. I will return to them in a second, but let's just start with a discussion of the stories themselves, because I think that's a good place to go. And let's see if we can try to identify some means by which the stories can be seen to be some kind of maybe collective whole or something. I think there are some ideas, but that have been expressed in the supplements, etc. But let's see if we can come up with some on our own and go from there. So we have the 4 stories, which is The Black Hair, which is a story about a man a samurai who leaves his wife and marries another woman in order to what we understand to be some kind of social climb up the social ladder in order to attain a certain level of fame and wealth and access to a better life outside of the life of poverty that he otherwise had with his first wife. But then he finds that he is unhappy, and he returns, or he tries to return to his deserted wife, and the story progresses from there in a very sad, maybe lugubrious, and ultimately quite shocking and somewhat horrifying conclusion in terms of what actually happens to the samurai and the fate of him and the black hair, which had been up to then just a sort of an unspoken of motif that we saw of the first wife, but then suddenly it becomes this demonic thing that seems to attack him. I mean, I think a lot of this could be seen to be, on the surface, to be quite, how should I put it? I mean this. I don't mean this in a negative way, but I mean this in a very positive way to describe the narrative. But in the realm of the absurd, and also if we take it for what it's directly telling us, which is the idea of the hair attacking the guy who is suddenly growing old before our very eyes, right? And there is a lot of things about those actual elements of the film. Now, I would say that there is a room to interpret that particular moment to be not necessarily directly understanding the story to be, oh yes, this is the actual supernatural hair that's attacking the man. I mean, it could be. I mean, there is a supernatural element to that. And if so, I think that the film, while has a certain shock value upon initial watch, I would suggest that the sources of the film, or that particular segment, that give us stronger senses of dread, or at least give me stronger senses of dread, are the shock of the man discovering that his wife, his first wife, whom he actually loved, or he expresses that he loved, even though he did desert her. And he's talking about the past life that they had. This is the room where they first consummated their relationship, and that sort of detail. And he's so happy to be back, and that night before, and then he wakes up and he realizes that it's just a rotted skeletal corpse. And so the horror and the sadness and the dread of that particular moment, I think, for me, ultimately are the ultimate sources of the particular horror of that moment, right? And that gives us a sense of what's going on going forward, which is, I think we have, on the one hand, surface level elements of horror, which I think themselves are absurd and they can be quite presented in a way that are also maybe quite beautiful and artistically filled with a lot of artistic flourish. I note the beautiful camera work here, the makeup effects here on the samurai actor, Rentaro Mikuni, very famous actor, by the way. And so and then the use of sound and soundscape, the Takemitsu sounds as well here, and also the use of colors and contrasts and the like. There aren't any dark shadows necessarily. There are some bits of darkness and desolation at the very end when we see the first house and actually what it has become, and it has become all run down. But there isn't anything in terms of shadow and jump scare and something lurking behind a corner or anything like that. Everything is very upfront. Everything is very colorful. And so I would say that the surface level elements of this film, let's call it the visual elements of this film, I would say give us a kind of story that I would say is not necessarily in your face scary or horrifying, but the horror or the dread or the feeling of shock, I think, come from what is behind the screen, so to speak, namely the human emotions that are infused in that particular moment. Therefore, I think that the dynamic between foreground, let's call it foreground and background, or let's call it surface level and beyond the surface level, I think that dynamic is what creates the wonderful aesthetic quality that is this film as it serves as a kind of horror film. And I don't mean to suggest that approach is in any way, how should I put it, the surface level is less important than the deeper level or anything like that. I think those terms themselves, surface and deeper, I think they themselves might suggest that the surface level is in some ways an inferior way to look at the film. I'm not trying to suggest that at all. I think both have equal merit, which is why I think it's very common to see people describe this film as a very beautiful work of art. It's very lovely to look at, and I think there's a lot to say about that. But so already we see this dynamic going on, and even within those elements themselves, I would say that there are clashes, I think purposely done in order to confuse us, in order to disorientate us, in order to set us up for some kind of fall, or to set up an arc that is to have an ultimate payoff in the end of the particular segment. So what do I mean? So for example, let's take the surface level of the first segment, the black hair segment. Note that there are so many most of the scenes are taking place in stages, right? In terms of sound stages, and they are obviously sound stages. They don't look to be natural settings for the most part, and this is due to, I think, the Shigemasa Toda direction, the art direction, and the like. In terms of these are houses, but they seem to be built on interior stages. So there is a bit of a theatricality quality, an artificial quality to most of the proceedings. But then suddenly, for instance, when there's when the newly married samurai and his second wife are traveling, we do see shots of the film, let's say, from high above, and trees, and in the forest. These are actual settings. They aren't in any sort of sets. They are actually out in the open in natural settings, and this is quite astonishing indeed. I would go so far as to say this creates a little bit of a subliminal disorienting feeling in my mind, and because I have the strong. It would have been so easy, for instance, I think, to have set the hut or the house of the first wife and the first marriage in a sort of natural setting. Let's say a little house in some farm somewhere. I mean, those areas of locations I understand still existed in early 1960s Japan, and heck, I think they still exist even now if you go maybe on the outskirts of Tokyo or beyond. And so my point is that I think it wouldn't have been outside the realm of possibility to have done that. But I think the fact that for the most part we get a lot of shots that are set on stages, but then we do get these shots in the black hair. They happen also in other segments. I think most strikingly in the Hoichi, the earless segment, where we actually go to the waters, Shimonoseki, Dannorura. We actually go see the crashing waters and such. So I think there is a striking thing that goes on. Do you agree? Which is that we are enclosed in these sets which have an artificial theatricality quality to them, but then we are suddenly thrust out into the open and into the natural settings. And why is this? What feelings does this engender? I don't think that. I mean, on the one hand, I think it's supposed to evoke the natural qualities of the beauty of the nature settings, because these are very beautiful natural settings and such. But also, I think in some way it's supposed to, or it engenders in me a further sense of sadness. It's almost like the real world is creeping in. There's this idea, like when you have a nightmare, or when I have a nightmare and I'm sleeping and I have a nightmare, there's a moment when I wake up, and this idea that when I wake up, there's this moment of panic because I still feel like I'm in the dream and I'm panicking. But then I realize, oh gosh, I'm awake, and so it's just a dream. So that moment of release, as it were, it's almost like at the cusp between what is real and what is fantasy. Well, I think something like that is happening, at least on a subliminal level and maybe on a broad level, to me, when I see these jarring moments. And they aren't even jarring in the sense that they call attention to themselves in the film, but they just suddenly happen. And so it doesn't, and I don't feel it until sort of after the fact. It's almost like I'm swerving in and out between the dream world and the real world, or something like that. And so I find that to be a kind of nice subliminal touch on the surface level. And I think that holds true also for the Hoichi, the earless segment, and I'll try to get to that in a second. But that's the surface level tension, or one aspect of the surface level tension, at least in the first story. Let's talk about it in terms of the non-surface level tension. So when we talk about the narrative now and the story, in terms of the moment when the samurai comes back to the hut after being away for so many years and seeing the first wife there, the tension that I see is very interesting, which is the way in which he comes back and he is so longing to, he has felt this sense of longing to be with his first wife again. Remember, he has had visions of her even when he was away. When he was on his horse and doing his archery, he had visions of her and the very powerful camera movements there, etc. So it's not like, we've been set up to understand that he has been longing for her for some time, and now that he's back, I think I identify basically two sources of tension, among many others, of course, but here's an example. The night he comes back, he sort of unloads his soul, as it were, and he gives us his story about how he loved her, and how about he's recalling the life that he had with her, and he's recalling the lifestyle that he had, and the things that they did, and just that sort of longing that he is expressing on the one hand. So this is a very this is itself a kind of act of storytelling on the part of the samurai. And it's a storytelling technique that leads me to feel a sense of sadness, the sense of loss, the sense of just maybe what a waste, that sort of feeling. And also a sense of relief in some respects, because we have the two of them, or at least the samurai, from the samurai's point of view, relief because now they're back together from his point of view, anyway, at least for one fleeting moment, right? And we understand it's fleeting because we go to the morning, or we go to the next day when he wakes up. And this is the counterpoint to that source of tension, namely the horror. And he realizes where he is, and this is not what he thought it was the night before. And then everything just turns to chaos. And so those two differing poles, if you will, the sadness and the horror, let's put it in those simple terms, I think also add a sense of tension, which I think is really lovely, and because I think the fact that the tension exists makes the horror even greater, and also the fact that the tension exists makes the sadness even greater. So what do I mean? So for example, I think the fact that the setup of the story and how he was so longing to be with his first wife leads into the final denouement of the first story, I think makes the horror segments better, because it gives us a sort of human, I don't know if psychological is the right term, but it gives us a human emotional hook upon which we can hang our very expectations at the very end, right? It's not just the fact that, oh, here's a ghost and it attacks someone. No, this is something that it could be a ghost, it could all be in his mind, it could be just this overwhelming sense of guilt that is manifest in terms of cinema visual style as a skeleton and growing old and the age and the flying hair and all that stuff. But ultimately, there's nothing more horrifying than realizing that one is too late and having an overwhelming sense of guilt, and also knowing that what one wanted so much, the only thing that one wanted so much in this world, is gone and it will never be recovered. There's something quite horrifying about that particular element, and those feelings wouldn't be possible had it not been for the contrast that was set up with the seemingly contrasting element of sadness that we saw the night before. So I love that tension that creates or that promotes this feeling of so-called horror in the first element. And I think what's nice is the one of the supplements in the Criterion collection with the assistant director Ogasawara, Kiyoshi Ogasawara, one of the comments he makes, which I think is so great, so great. Why were the stories selected by the Kobayashi and screenwriter Mizuki? Why were they selected in this way? Why were these 4 stories selected? And what is the connective tissue among the 4? And what the assistant director Ogasawara opines is that they all have this sense, not of horror necessarily, but they all have the sense of dread and sadness. They all have this sense of dread and sadness to them. And I think that's, at least according to him, what propels the horror forward. And I think there is a lot to be said about that approach, in particular with respect to the film The Black Hair. And I think it's that sense of sadness that propels the horror forward, if you know what I mean, at a very, in my very base level way of expressing it. So anyway, that is, let's think about that as we go forward and go from there. And actually, before I go to the comments, let me just continue this. I'll try to continue with all the stories here in a second. Next is the story, the Woman of Snow, or Snow Woman, and this is with Keiko Kishi and Tatsuya Nakadai, 2 very famous actors in this part of Japanese cinema. But this also has this sense of let's say contrasting elements, and I'll try to get to those in a second. I think here we have a story that is, I think, more clearly presented in terms of its theatrical, artificial quality, in terms of the sets that are used, the sky with the eyes painted on them, the snow and the soundscapes and the like. I mean, it's an incredible feat when one realizes that all this stuff is done. I mean, it looks like it's done in the stage, right? I mean, when we see the storm and the crashing waters, when they realize that the boat is not tied up to the dock, they have to go into the house. I think that's a really powerful moment, but it's done from a distance, and it's a set, right? It looks like a set to me, and so I find that to be a remarkable feat in terms of the art direction and the set design and stuff. But I think what we have in that story too, which is essentially a story about a husband who just talks too much, right? And he says more than he should have. And I think it's that active talking which leads to a sense of betrayal. So it's this idea of promises and trusts and breaking one's promise that leads to the breakdown of a relationship. And oh boy, the breakdown is quite a dramatic one indeed. But I think just going off of the discussion from the earlier story, I think what we have also here in terms of sources of tension, of course we have visual motifs, warm and cold. I think that's the biggest example of the tension that we see, warmth and coldness. The coldness, of course, is implied by these beautiful white snowy landscapes and the blues, and when we see the Snow Woman herself, at her first appearance, when she basically attacks and kills the older woodcutter, and then she faces us and faces the younger woodcutter, faces us, the camera, and then Minokichi, and then she says, don't say anything about this to anyone. And we see her, and she's white. She has this white clothing, but she's surrounded by hues of blue. She's got the blackened teeth, and everything is very very like spectral. She's like a specter almost. She is a ghost, and so. But then we see her again in warmth. We see her seemingly as a young girl who has lost her family, and she's alone, and she's just on her way to the big city. But then she meets the woodcutter again, and then the implication is that they fall in love in a very, I think, sudden and actually quite jarring. Glimpse of nudity, I think, in the film, but I think that that's meant to be a poetic shorthand, if you will, of expressing the carnal nature of the relationship between the two of them, right? And it's based off of love. It's based off of sexual attraction, and then it leads to the idea that they have a family and they live a long life together with these children, 3 children, in fact. And so there is a lot of like contrast already developed, not only in terms of the visual style, the warmth and the cold, but also temporally in terms of the moments, the dramatic moments that are stretched out over seemingly short periods of time on the one hand, and then suddenly the huge jumps of time that we suddenly see that are made based off of poetic implications in terms of editing and in terms of a performance implication and the like. And so I think what we have, therefore, is the same thing going on with the first, namely the first story, namely this idea of tensions yielding a sense of foreboding and sadness and longing, and then ultimately the horror that is to unfurl at the very end, right? Because there is a sense of loss. There is a sense of, why did he do such a stupid thing? Namely the husband. Why did he do such a stupid thing in saying this and doing this, right? And I think the only way to explain that in any way that would be reasonable, still reasonable enough to be able to sympathize with him at the story's end, is that, a lot can happen over the course of many years. And we can, I forget things that I said yesterday, let alone things that I might have said or done 5-10 years ago, right? And so it's just the natural human slip of the tongue, as it were. And I find that to be such a human moment, and thus such a sad moment. In other words, I find that the contrasts that the story engenders in terms of temporal space and the use of temporal space, the way in which it elongates certain moments, but then suddenly jumps forward in time to create this feeling of an eternity, a lifetime together. I find that setup of the creation of an eternity to be so wonderful, because it then allows the film to then dash all hopes and expectations within a single moment that is itself elongated over a great space, which is basically the beginning and the end parts of that particular story. And I love that contrast. I think that is great, and it adds to the beautiful visual contrast that I was trying to mention before, with the heat and the cold, the warmth and the cold. I mean, the loveliness of the couple and the fact that they are together. It's a really lovely moment, but then they are broken apart, and then everything turns to cold, and the sandals that he so lovingly tried to make for his wife are just left covered in the snow. And those are the contrasts that I think add the sense of, let's say, feelings of sadness and longing that lead to the horror, or that lead to the scary elements of this, right? Because the scary element for this particular segment, at least for me, isn't necessarily the shock of this woman. I mean, I don't think it was to anyone's surprise that the woman ended up becoming the Snow Woman. I mean, in Japanese, her name, it seems like it's the same actress, and in Japanese, her name is Yuki, which is the Japanese word for snow. So it wasn't like it was a surprise. I don't think the point of the story was to surprise us with that shocking revelation, but I think it was meant, therefore, to give us the dread through other means, so to speak. And I think the dread is this idea of, I think it's a very shocking thing to have worked and lived so long for something, only to have it just dashed in a moment. can never be able to repair it. It's something that is irreparable, and it's something that was based on something that I could have prevented, right? The Minoguchi, the Tatsuya Nagadai character, could have prevented this from happening had he just kept his mouth shut. But oh well, he was just so caught up in the moment, I suppose. And it wasn't even his fault. It was just a human moment, as it were. But he did break his promise, or he did break the word of the Snow Woman. And this is also another interesting thing as a connective tissue with the stories. Now, not only do we have the sense of dread and sadness leading to horror that I think we can sort of see, at least connect these first two stories, but we also see the power of storytelling here. In the first story, let's remember that we saw a moment where it was the samurai who came back to the old house and his first wife, and he was telling the story, in a sense, of how he loved his first wife and how he recalled their life together before he moved away, their long time ago. So he is, in fact, telling us the story of their relationship. It's interesting, too, because we never saw their relationship, him and the first wife, prior to him leaving. I mean, the first thing we see is actually him deserting his wife, the moment of him deserting his wife. And so we never see moments of them together. We do see flashbacks a little bit, but those aren't flashbacks of them together necessarily. But we do, the only source of information we get about their life prior to him going off and marrying the second woman is this story. And so that storytelling element is really, I think, key in setting up the sadness and really setting up the thing about the relationship that he will eventually be seen to have lost by this story's end. So, in fact, the storytelling element, therefore, is really important, and it's like a means to his downfall in a certain way. Here in the Snow Woman, or the Woman of the Snow segment, I think something a little bit similar is happening. It is the act of the Tatsuya Nagadai character is telling the story at the very end. He tells the story to his wife about how he got trapped in the snow and what happened to him. That leads to his downfall, in a sense, right? Because that's telling of the story that creates the conflict. And it creates the ultimate betrayal, at least from the Snow Woman's point of view. And so that leads to his downfall as well, in a very similar way that perhaps it led to the downfall of the first samurai. And also it leads to this notion about the power of storytelling and the power that it holds. It was fortunate for Minoguchi, the woodcutter in the second story, fortunate enough that the Snow Woman didn't kill him, right? I mean, it could have killed him, but it didn't, for the sake of the children. At least that's what she said. So it didn't go that far. But I think we can already see some elements beginning to develop, I think, in terms of the use of contrasts in both the visual plane of the film and also in the narrative thematic planes of the film, to create the sense of dread or sadness that I think starts to create the connective tissue. Also, we see the act of storytelling at play, at least in the first two stories. And I think that is also a very connective tissue. And I think we will see this act of storytelling come to the fore quite brilliantly in the Hoichi the Earless segment, and then also quite brilliantly in the Cup of Tea segment. So let's think about those going forward. But that's just my discussion of the first half of the film, and then we go into intermission. So with that in mind, my friends, let me just take a quick break and see what discussions are to be had in the live stream chat. So, and excuse me while I just enjoy a quick sip of tea. If you hear a hiss, that's not any kind of bodily noise or anything like that. It's just me opening my bottle of water, which is carbonated water, so sparkling water. So, excuse me, but I am feeling a little bit under the weather. It's not a cold yet, but my throat is a little bit dry, so I apologize for having to take a sip of water. But let's see. Okay, going back. Let's see. Oh, Tim Holmes says some of the most beautiful color cinematography ever. Yes. So Yoshio Miyajima, right? Yes, is the cinematographer. And here, and there's a great story from Stephen Prince about how Yoshio, there seem to be some differences in political viewpoints between the cinematographer and the director, I think, at least in some regards. But I think they got along very well in terms of an artistic collaboration. The way in which certain colors are captured and I mean, just talking about the segments that I've already spoken about, the way in which some camera movements, there are the horizontal camera movements along the plane and also vertical camera movements going up. There are also movements going like this. Was the extreme canted frame angles that add the furthering of disorientation. The horizontal axis, what is it? Stephen Prince calls it turns on the z-axis, which I think is really just fantastic. We see that also in the Cup of Tea segment and also others. With this idea of extreme angled shots from a shot below, etc. Even in the Woman of the Stove segment, when her identity is revealed, the camera suddenly turns on an extreme angle as she approaches. I love those moments, and it creates these wicked vertical lines, not vertical lines, these wicked lines, these horizontal, not vertical, not horizontal, diagonal lines in the background that I think are quite vividly jarring. But then they contrast very nicely to the wonderful compositions that are created. That adds to a certain sense of theatricality, perhaps, which I think which gives the film a real lovely quality. It also adds to the benefit of the film, and in particular, the third story, of which the earless, the compositions in those, in many of those shots, I think, are just absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. The way in which some of the close-ups are achieved. I mean, it highlights the theatrical makeup effects and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we're meant to see that. We're meant to see, the theatrical feel of it. And I think the contrast between the very symmetrical compositions that are taken from a distance of the retinue and the emperor and Lady Ni and Antoku, everyone listening in to the biwa performance, etc., and also the sharpness contrast that's created in terms of their close-ups, and also the close-ups on faces, and of course the chaos that ensues at the very end of that, when we have the beauty of let's say the symmetrical shots from the first half of that particular segment, Hoichi the Earless, contrast quite darkly with the chaos of the end of the segment, where the ghost warrior is basically ripping the ears off of this guy. So, and then we see the blood and all the stuff, the bloody handprints, etc. And so I find that to be just I mean, it's another example of how the beautiful cinematography and the beautiful work leads to different tones and elements, because there are some clashes going on, some more contrast. But I'll get to that in a second, hopefully. But yes, I agree, Tim, 100%. Jared says, I found the first story to be the creepiest. It was also very sad. Yes. And yes, the black hair story, very creepy. You know, I thought the shot when we see the reflection in the water of the samurai, and he's getting old, and it's from, like, it's a reverse shot, or it's from, like, upside down. I found that to be really creepy. And there's something about faces shot upside down in reflections in this film. I think they're really creepy. Also, in A Cup of Tea, there's a similar kind of shot with the reflection of the face that's shot from upside down. I think that's really creepy. Yeah, just scary stuff. And GR62 is very nice towards Rothschilding would be proud. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. You know, this, although that's also something that's really interesting about this this set of stories, right? They aren't necessarily morality tales. Well, perhaps the closest to a morality tale could be the first story, maybe the second story, I don't know. I think Stephen Prince makes the argument that they aren't necessarily meant to be considered morality tales in the sense that we have a character that maybe gets his or her comeuppance at the end, which is one of the ways in which, let's say, the Twilight Zone operates, I think, to great effect. Granted, maybe when we talk about the black hair segment, yes, we can see a character who maybe did something wrong in terms of abandoning his first wife in favor of his second wife, who ended up not being the nurturing or the partner that he was looking for, perhaps, or he didn't get the fulfillment that he got from his first wife, out of the relationship with his first wife. So my point is, perhaps there was a morality tale to be told there, but not really, because we do see him remorseful when he comes back, and we see him regretful and almost with a sense of guilt. He doesn't come back out of a sense, at least I don't get a sense that he feels like he seems selfish. He does maybe at the beginning, but toward the middle there, I think he is conveying a sense of remorse and regret, which I don't think gives me a sense of comeuppance at the end of the first episode there. I think it really focuses on the dread and the sadness and the tragedy of it. The same for the Woman of the Snow Egg segment. This could be seen to be kind of similar to a Twilight Zone episode, in the sense that we have a character's mistake leading to these terrible conclusions. I think there's an episode that's very similar in story to this, but my point is that this perhaps could be, but again, the same thing. There seems to be a focus on the sadness, and everything is drawn out. It's not meant, the point of the story is not necessarily the surprise, and I don't even think the point of the story is the fact that she ends up being the snow woman. But I think the point of the story, or one of the main points of the story, is the effect of this, and the loss, and the tragedy of the loss of this. And I think that makes it somewhat slightly shift its focus away from sort of like this kind of short story, let's say morality play element of Rod Serling's one of Rod Serling's great works. So, but at the same time, there are comparisons to be made. True. I do agree with that in terms of the sort of punchline that's set up, and a story with a bit of a twist at the end, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I do see that. But also at the same time, there is something of a so I'm going to take that. Well, actually, let me just hold off on my comments there, but say that there are some, I think, differences, but also some similarities. So that's a really good comment. Very good comment. And then Mr. Dat says, Toru Takemitsu's score is pretty great. Yes, I agree completely. It's not quite music. They are trying to mimic sounds, but they are done in a way, and the biwa is of course music, but it's done in a very sharp and aggressive and attacking sort of way almost. But he's also trying to mimic natural sounds, but they are very unnatural, and they're obviously so. There's almost an electric instrument quality to it, in terms of the way the sounds are augmented and warped and manipulated to create these really unnatural setting moments. And there isn't any attempt to try to recreate faithfully any sort of feeling of ambient natural sound. Everything is very layered and textured and put on, but for a purpose and for an effect, namely to jar and to but also Takemitsu also valued silence, as well as also there's a sort of psychological effect that is created in the listener. That moment between, that bridges the moments of sound on the one hand and silence on the other. There's a sort of psychological effect that he seems to espouse as a sort of music philosophy. But my point here is that the moments of silence also are quite effective and jarring, and my understanding that they are also done on purpose on the part of Takemitsu and the soundscape that he has designed here. So the sounds are important, the silences are important, and the attempts at seemingly trying to recreate sounds in nature, but actually creating sounds of unnature, and all this stuff, and there is a traditional element to the sounds in terms of for instance, the hoichi, the earless segment. But there's also a kind of experimental 60s experimental music nature to it, and again, more contrasts, more things to confuse us, to delight us, and also to put us more on edge, and give us a sense of foreboding. We're never allowed to remain comfortable. Every time we, or at least I seem to get a sense of being used to the sound, suddenly it'll drift into silence, and then suddenly I feel unnerved because I realize I'm seeing something. There's no sounds that are accompanying the scene that would otherwise have sound if it were experienced by me in the natural world. And so this is just another example of creating contrasts, I think, to move the proceedings forward here, to create or to engender or to prop up or to support the otherwise grand feeling of dread and horror and foreboding. So well done. Yes, Mr. Dad, I completely agree with you. Completely agree. Let's see. So just going on. Hello. So Ayakona 23. Hello, my friend. It's nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. And Heirloom Providence, hello, it's nice to see you. And you're saying, been a long time since I've seen this film, but remember the camera work being amazing. Yes, the camera work is indeed quite impressive. Again, the camera moves along the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis, and then according to Stephen Prince, the so-called Z-axis on its tilts, and everything in between. The horizontal movements might generally be suggestive of, let's say, movements on the ground, the human elements of the film, as it were. Vertical movements might be suggestive, especially in the third segment, of more ethereal elements, the ghostly elements of the proceedings, as it were. And then Z-axis camera movements, or the sudden extreme shifts on an axis, tilting like this and going like this, or the other way around, might suggest sudden shifts in tempo. I don't know if the idea of sudden realization of character, it does happen, but these are sudden or just shocks, if you will, or sudden realizations of what one has done, etc. So, shock moments, for lack of a better phrase. Camera work is indeed magnificent, absolutely magnificent. So that's Yoshio Miyajima. So we should remember that, Yoshio Miyajima. Okay, so and then just going forward here. Okay, sorry, I've just skipped down. Okay. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I've just skipped down here. Gosh. Okay, I've just done what I usually do in. Okay, sorry about this. I've just skipped down. Okay, now I found my place. So, okay. I usually do this sometimes because I'm really bad with using this computer. Just one touch and suddenly it's a touch screen, so I can use this. I just scroll down by just going like this on the screen, but just one touch, sometimes I'm brought to the very end of this chat, which is not where I usually want to go. I'm trying to focus on a comment at the middle there, but it takes me to the end. I have to go all the way back. So, oh gosh. I don't mind, though. It's just another example of why my computer skills are not so good. Okay. Here we go. Okay. All things film. I can't stick around. Just wanted to say hello to Daisuke and to the rest of you and have a good time talking about this film, which I don't mind. I think my favorite story is The Snow Witch one. Yes, very good. Okay, and Jay says, BT for Scotch Irish, but Jay is just fine. But okay, I'll call you Jay if you don't mind. Let's see. Kubrick Lover 1972. Hello, it's nice to see you. Okay, great. And I see a lot of discussions here. Tim, thank you very much. You're helping me out here, talking about Kobayashi, the director, and Lafcadio Hearn. And let's see. Let's see. Okay. Davey, hello, it's nice to see you. Cooper Lover 1972 says, I like the story with the tattooed person who has the tattoos on his... Oh, so tattoos... yes, the writing on the body, Hoichi the Earless, or the story of Hoichi the Earless. Yes, he has the sutra that's written on his body in order to protect him from this what they understand or they think to be the evil spirits. So, they didn't quite do a good enough job, apparently. And I love the scene, actually, where the head priest, played by Takashi Shimura, after that horrible thing has already happened to Hoichi. I mean, the title is Hoichi the Earless, and we see him at first, and he has ears, but he's blind. So, gosh, so he's blind. So he's already without the sense of sight to begin with. And then the title is Hoichi the Earless, and so ears have to do with hearing, another separate sense, right? Not the sense of sight, but the sense of hearing. So already even the title of the story seems to be antagonistic against this poor character, Hoichi. You know, he didn't do anything wrong necessarily, but what was my point? My point is that I love the moment where the head priest, Takashi Shimura, after that terrible incident with the ears has occurred, he sort of very nonchalantly says, oh yeah, I'm paraphrasing, oh yeah, we didn't cover his ears. And that's it. He doesn't necessarily take blame for it, essentially, but and then afterwards, of course, the place becomes very famous and very wealthy because of all the gifts that are given because of the fame that Hoichi has engendered, etc. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting. It's quite an interesting. That kind of almost a dry comic touch in the film, but anyway, just going forward here. So anyway, Davey, hello, it's nice to see you. And Kubrick Lover 1972 says, Daisuke, would you say it's an atmospheric kind of horror? Yes, atmospheric in the sort of sense that I was trying to describe earlier. Visual elements and then behind the surface elements that are going on here. Also, I wouldn't necessarily call it horror. Feelings of dread that are propelled on and supported by notions of sadness and tragedy and regret. Yes, let's see, okay, and eerie, Kubrick Lover 1972 asks, would you say it's eerie, Daisuke? Eerie, yes, very much so. Gets under the skin type of eerie, definitely. Let's see. Okay, Helsinki Renaissance Arts Channel, hello, my friend. And you're also talking about the Eureka video and the Criterion version and the length. So thank you very much for covering that, my friend. I hope you're well. I also noticed, I just noticed that you put up a video, I think you're talking about streaming and cinema, and I think it's very interesting. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm gonna try to check it out later, hopefully later today. So Helsinki Renaissance Arts Channel, I hope you're well, my friend. Thank you for joining. Okay, so Jared has to go. So anyway, Jared, I hope you're well. Take care, my friend. Marlon, hello. It's nice to see you. And just going forward, you've watched one half of it, And Marlon says, I thought the one on the Criterion Channel was the full version of the film. I don't know what the version is on the Criterion Channel. If it's the 183 some odd minute version of the film, that is considered to be that is the complete version. The earlier, I don't know about, I know that, for instance, the earlier Criterion releases here, for instance, this is the DVD. This is set to be 161 minutes, and so there are some differences that are taken out. The Stephen Prince commentary on the Blu-ray, and I think also on the Criterion Channel, goes into some detail about some of the differences that are taken out. For instance, some of the early segments of the Hoichi the Earless story involving the recreation or the performance at the very start of that of the biwa performance about the tale of the Heike and the Genpei War and the battle of at the Danurua. So and that the battle that is depicted at the very start of that. I think some of those shots are not included in the 161 odd minute version of the film, at least according to Stephen Prince. I haven't done a comparative side-by-side watch of the versions in some time, actually, so I don't quite recall exactly. I did that once some years back, maybe when the Blu-ray was first released. So because this was a big deal to get the actual complete version. And that's one of the great things about Ogasawara's discussion and interview here, the assistant director's interview, which is included as a supplement, because he actually goes into some of this history behind how they were able to track down and restore the complete versions. Now, I understand that Kobayashi had passed away before he was able to see the actual final complete version, but he did see a restored version of one of he did see a restored version of it before his passing, according to Ogasawara. And so he was very, very moved and very happy to have been able to see that. And so I was very glad to hear that. And that's another reason why the Ogasawara interview, as one of the supplements here, is really a must watch. You have to see it. It's not that long, but it's a must watch. If you are a fan of Kobayashi and if you're a fan of this film, you've got to see that if you haven't already. It is really, really great. Okay, so let me just now go at, while I'm talking about Hoichi the Earless, let's just go into the second discussion here, which is the second two, or the latter half of this film. Namely, let's start with Hoichi the Earless, and we can go from there. Excuse me. So, the Hoichi the Earless segment is the third segment here, and we have Katsuo Nakamura plays Hoichi, who is the blind monk, and he is also a biwa player, and he has this ability to be able to perform the Battle of the Danura in the Tale of the Heike, which is the final battle between the two warring clans here. And so and it depicts the downfall of excuse me. It depicts the downfall of one side of the clan, and the battle that ensues between the two sides, and then also the downfall and the end, and the deaths of all these people by essentially suicide, as well as by on the battlefield, as it were. The battlefield here being the waves of the water. And so we have, I think, and then the idea is that the spirits, right, these ghosts, want to hear the performance by this young man on the biwa, and it's a means for them to listen in and to sort of recall this very important and iconic moment in the film, or not in the film, in the battle, in this Japanese history. And then this idea again of of ghostly spirits intruding in on the natural world and the natural setting. And then we have this notion, therefore, of this priest trying to protect the... Oh, excuse me. Sorry, just my computer died. Let me just... Sorry, it just died on me, so let me just set it up while I talk. But then we have this notion of the priests trying to... what is it? They're trying to save him or protect him, and they realize that the way in which they can protect him and protect him from being brought away into the spirit world, the other side, as it were, is by writing the words of the certain sutra on his body in a very vividly visually poetic way, with black ink and then red ink as well. It's very reminiscent, I think, of the very opening sequence of the film, the opening titles with the clearness and then colors going through liquid like ink in water, and it reminds us of that sort of motif. It also brings us back to the motif of writing and storytelling in a certain interesting way, this idea of writing what is in essence a kind of story, if you will, on one's body in order to protect one who is himself a kind of storyteller. And this also brings us to a nice another bit of connective tissue, as it were. If we look at the act of storytelling, and we look at the act of the power of storytelling that we saw in the first two stories. Here in Hoichi the Earless, I think storytelling is brought to the fore at the very focus, because it is the performance is itself a kind of act of storytelling, right? It is recalling this particular event in the battle, in the war. And then okay, there we go. Yes, there we go. So that we have this, oh, hold on, sorry about this. Yes, so, sorry about this. I'm just setting this up here and then I'll be done. Sorry. Oh gosh. Again, I'm really bad with my computer, so I'm really sorry about this. Okay. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay, so I'm sorry. So my computer is now back up. My point is that the act of storytelling is very key here, and it's quite complex. On the one hand, it is the storytelling through the act of the biwa performance of this particular moment in the tale of the Heike, the Dan no Ura battle. That is to conclude the War of the Genpei War. That is the centerpiece here. And it's this ability to be able to express the story in this really powerful way that Hoichi is able to do so, is what attracts the spirit world to him. And that's what compels them to bring them over to their side for a little bit, and then they are to enjoy his performance. So is his act of storytelling that is the impetus, if you will, the focus of the particular narrative thrust of this particular story. Okay, and then also we have this idea of writing and the sutra on his body, and this is means to protect him. So in an interesting way, a kind of storytelling on the visual side, which is the priest trying to write the stuff on his body on the one hand, this kind of storytelling on the one hand is used to protect him from not allowing him to otherwise tell his story through the biwa on the other hand. So it's one act of storytelling in a way sort of impeding on another act of storytelling, which is, I think, really fascinating. And it's starting to get into this idea of storytelling itself, which I think will become so meta-focused at the fourth story in A Cup of Tea. But here we're starting to get glimpses of that already. Also, I would point out this interesting dynamic, which is this idea of it's the storytelling aspect of him, of Hoichi, that attracts the spirit world to him. And yet, an interesting thing, it's the fact that he is not telling his story. It's the fact that he is told to maintain silence. He has to be silent and ignore the ghost samurai as it appears for that final night. He's meant to ignore him. That's what the priests tell him. He has to ignore. He has not to say anything. And that's why he's sitting there, not responding. And the ghost cannot see him except for the ears that are sticking out, of course, and that's a main plot point. But my point here is that it's an interesting thing that it's, in fact, the fact that he doesn't give his story, namely the Biwa performance, which in a way leads to his short-term downfall in a kind of interesting way. If he had been allowed to give the performance, then he would have been over to the spirit world. But then, of course, he is under threat because it is seen to be something threatening, at least from the priest's point of view. And so, but I find that dynamic to be quite interesting. The fact that he doesn't say anything that, in a sense, leads to his sort of downfall. But we find out later that, in fact, it brings him and the temple a lot of fame and wealth by the story's end, which I think is a really interesting twist. So here we are starting to get this idea of storytelling and the complexities of storytelling, which I've tried to convey here. Not only do we get the sense of storytelling and the effects on the immediate effects on the human body and the human psyche, which we kind of saw at the first two stories, but also we're getting conflicts and different approaches to storytelling. We're also getting the long-term effects of storytelling, and here we can understand that perhaps the long-term effects, for at least for the temple anyway, and the priests, are quite good and quite prosperous. And so there is that to be said, which I think is an interesting little contrast with the earlier stories as well. Also, in terms of the storytelling and the battle, the Heike Monogatari and the Dan no Ura sequence. And I should also point out, before I get into that, also we are getting some striking visual motif contrasts that we sort of saw, not sort of, we actually saw in the first story, namely the use of the theatrical versus the use of actual shots. Here I think we open the story with shots of the real water straits, and then we see the priest looking over, and then we hear the beginnings of the performance, as it were, which I think is fascinating. We're actually there on location, and according to Stephen Prince, that's the actual place where the battle, right, that is being depicted here is that's the location of the battle, which we then see reenacted, as it were, or not reenacted, but it's depicted artistically in what is obviously a recreated set. And then the waters are recreated. It's not the same texture of water that we saw in the earlier real shots of the film, etc. So I think that's another great contrast, like what we saw in the earlier sequences, where we had contrasts that seemed to suggest not only the intrusion of the real world and the dream world, but also the contrast that set up the notion of sadness and then loss, which leads to the tragedy and the horror. Here, I think it's the same thing. We're actually seeing these horrible war images being depicted artistically, theatrically, through a sort of artificial stage quality. But then when you go to like the place, it brings everything kind of closer to home, so to speak. And I think it's actually quite striking. Also, speaking of the war aspects, I was talking earlier about how this film, KWAIDAN, might be seen to be a kind of, how shall I put it? It might seem to be a kind of anomaly in many respects, in the context of the filmography of Masaki Kobayashi, because he's known for making other films, Harakiri and Human Condition, that are talking about, or that are strongly, severely criticizing military power structures, and also government decrees and edicts and things that seem to overpower the importance of the individual spirit of the human being, etc., that lead to very devastating consequences. And I think he's trying to focus huge spotlights on these in these famous films of his. KWAIDAN might be seen to be apart from that tradition of social criticism on the one hand, but I think on the other hand, we do get a glimpse of the. I mean, let's take a step back in a very broad sense. I don't want to say anti-war, but the war scenes here are really quite horrific, and they are depicted in a way that are not necessarily shown in a sort of heroic light, but rather they are shown in a very devastating light, focusing on the human toll. Everything is quite theatrical and staged, but we see a lot of death, and the painting that's used, we see a lot of the death, and the music that's employed also focuses on the tragedy and the toil, the human sacrifice that's being had here. Also, by extension, later when we see the sort of the emperor and the retinue and the military class, the upper class, warrior class, etc., looking in on or the we see close-ups on their faces, and we see the strong, stark, symmetrical quality of the compositions of the visuals. I think, and Stephen Prince makes a really great point in this commentary, I think this is meant to sort of engender or evoke a sense of lack of feeling or expression on the part of power structures that are depicted here. This idea that perhaps they have a sense or lack of empathy when it comes to real significant human consequences that exist outside of their own. They seem to be focused in only on what concerns them in the immediate. And of course, what happens to them, Emperor Antoku, Lady Ni, and the retinue and the sacrifice they have, we see them jumping into this red sea, it's a red water, which is really quite a memorable image. But my point is that, of course, what happens to them is meant to be it's meant to focus in on the sort of the Buddhist notion of the impermanence of things and transience, and nothing lasts forever, that sort of thing. So there's almost like a glory, not glory, but there is not beauty, but there's something quite poetic at the moment of death on the one hand. But on the other hand, it's almost like the close-ups on them reveal that they cannot think beyond themselves, and they have no feeling of empathy beyond themselves. And so that, I think, can be seen to be a scathing critique on power structures and on the aristocracy and this notion of upper class and everyone else, and then also we tie that into the military and the military organs that are at play that lead to these devastating consequences. I think we can see, or at least sense, a through line that can help to connect this film KWAIDAN with some of Kobayashi's other great works. And so Stephen Prince makes really great points here. And I should point out, too, that Stephen Prince does go into great detail about, I think it's during his commentary which takes place during the Hoichi, the earless segment, in fact. And so he goes into great detail, not only about this aspect, about how this film might figure into the rest of the filmography of Kobayashi, but also he goes into Kobayashi himself, his background and his military background, what happened to him in the war, World War II, and the harrowing situations he found himself in and nearly found himself in. There are certain moments where, had things turned out slightly differently, perhaps he wouldn't have been able to survive the war himself. And so there are interesting there are interesting takeaways here. And so I think the war element that's depicted here cannot be overlooked. And I think it does have a certain focus. And even the fact that it's presented in a sort of poetic fashion, I think it's meant to then tie into the fact that it is a performance of a certain aspect of the tale of the Heike. And so it is the story element, the storytelling element, which is, I think, on display. But undeniable, this approach to power structures and the sort of the military complex, if you will, which is weaved into this, which I think is utterly fascinating and truly compelling. Not to mention, of course, the fact that this is really bloody, a very violent affair, and I think it's made even more violent because Hoichi as a character doesn't seem to be doing anything wrong necessarily. He's just essentially doing what he's being asked of, and even at the end, he displays a sense of duty and a desire to perform, which I think is quite admirable. And so, what happens to him, and the fact that he meets this bloody conclusion, he still survives with his life, of course, but it's really quite gruesome. And we don't see any bits of violence necessarily, but just the notion of the pulling and the sounds, and then we see the suddenly him holding him, cupping his ears like this with the blood pouring out, and then later we see the handprints on the wall, etc. It's really that is very, very unsettling, and even the visual motifs here with the writing on his face and things like that. Those are perhaps one of the if not the most iconic images of the film. And in fact, I think it adorns the cover, yes, of the earlier Criterion DVD. Incidentally, before I go, I love how the earlier Criterion DVD has the title here, KWAIDAN, but it has the W in a different color and lettering to suggest that this can also be said KAIDAN, which is the actual Japanese title. So, but in any event, my friends, Hoichi the Earless, it is, there are, I think, a lot of thematic complexities in this work, and not only does it have ties to the other stories here and within the world of KWAIDAN, but I think it also has the most potential for having the ties to other works in Kobayashi's filmography. So anyway, that is Hoichi the Earless. And so I think I can probably, yes, I'll go into the fourth story in a second, but first let me just go into your comments and then we can go from there. Let's see. Yes. Okay, so I'm just... Okay, Big W Studios, hello. Love this film. Tatsuya Nakadai is my all-time favorite actor. Yes, he's really good. He's really good. I would... the choices he makes in particular... This is in the Woman of the Snow. Now, the choices he makes as Minokichi, the choices that he makes, even in the littlest things, like when he decides, when he laughs, he gives a little kind of laugh underneath. And the happiness that he has when he's recalling the tale to his wife about how long time ago he was saved from a snowstorm from someone who looks just like her, and that leads to his downfall, of course. But that moment of, he's just so mindless in his happiness, I suppose, and I guess he has good reason to, because he's really in a good place. And there we go. Yes. Okay. Cooper Lover 1972 said, Daisuke, would you say that the artificial theatricality is embedded in the culture of Japanese folklore and society and history? I don't know. I have studied Japanese folklore and history to a certain extent. I wouldn't necessarily go... I don't know if I would be willing to go that far, at least at this point in time. What I would be willing to say, though, is the artificiality of this work. At least let's think about it in the context of KWAIDAN. It's very important because, let's say, if we talk about folklore, I don't think we have to tie it necessarily to Japanese folklore. It's this idea of storytelling, and it's this idea of weaving a tale, right? And therefore the artificiality, I think, ties, and I haven't spoken about this yet, but I think the artificiality of the sets and the makeup and the characters, and not the characters, but the makeup and the sound design, etc. It's obviously fake. It's artificial, right? But it's meant to be, I think, because in part it's meant to evoke a sense of the act of storytelling unfolding before our very eyes. And I think there's no better way to express that in visual terms than using this stage-like presentation, because when we see a stage-like presentation, we are automatically clued in visually to the fact that this is not necessarily real life, but it is something that is apart from real life, namely a story. KWAIDAN, eerie tales or telling of tales, etc. Lafcadio Hearn and the great interview that's given on one of the supplements here. It's talking about how he was able to develop many of the stories that he ended up publishing. Some of them did come from stories that he heard from people out in the streets, right? And so this idea of telling tales, I think that's where the direct link, I think, can be had with artificiality in the story. But definitely, yes, in terms of folklore, definitely, and in terms of the way stories were presented, I mean, they weren't necessarily presented in a way that was meant to evoke true reality. I mean, I don't want to go into detail about other forms of art in Japan, but there are certain modes of theater, there are certain modes of Japanese literary music tradition that are definitely not realistic, but are artificial, but they are meant to be. They're highly stylized. And so, and there is a kind of, there's also a tradition in art, in visual arts, that is not meant necessarily to depict a kind of realism in nature, but also something that is artificial looking. But there's certainly a lot to be said about that. But I don't want to get into too much detail about that, but generally speaking, I do want to focus my comments on KWAIDAN, but let's see. But artificial theatricality in history, I don't see necessarily the link between artificial theatricality and history. I can see it in the arts, but that's as far as my knowledge is allowing me to comment there, I'm afraid. But of course, it's a great question. No, undoubtedly, it's a great question. Let's see. Okay, so there's a discussion here, yes. Okay, just skipping over the discussion here. Let's see. Cooper Glover 1972 again says, the snow woman you mentioned, Daisuke, makes me think of the snow persons showing up in Akira Kurosawa's dreams. Yes, very much so. If we're also going to talk about that story and the connection with Kurosawa, I would also draw your attention to the eyes painted on the depicting the sky, and recall certain scenes, for instance, in Rhapsody in August. There's a very famous scene in Rhapsody in August involving a similar kind of visual motif. It's very striking. But dreams also, definitely we're talking about late Kurosawa, for sure. Also the dream sequence, I think it was mentioned in one of the in an earlier comment in the chat, but Kagemusha has a very famous dream sequence that is very uses a lot of color and stuff, and I think a lot can be said about that and the visual style, at least to a certain extent. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. All right, just scrolling down. RavenQ222 says, the spirit's confusion, you're talking about Hoichi the Earless here, the spirit's confusion at finding the floating ears is kind of hilarious. I love that scene. Yes, it is hilarious, and that's one of the great things about that particular, I think that the Hoichi the Earless story, more than anything else, there are moments of really dry humor in that, and I actually too find that kind of funny. You just see like these ears, and of course you see the make out of the outline of the body of Hoichi, of course. But it's like what's going on. It is very funny. It's frightening too, but it's also very funny. And the way it plays out, and all the stuff that happens, and then even with all the bloody stuff that happens, the head priest's reaction is very just dry and without much feeling and all that. And so I find that to be, and then the reaction of the people at the end. Are the people visiting the outsiders? Are they ghosts or are they not ghosts? We're not quite sure. So there's this weird sense of comic suspense. But then Hoichi brings everyone down and says, I'm going to play no matter what and stuff. So he's sort of taking control and stuff. So yes, I find that to have a lot of comedic elements as well. I agree. I agree completely with that. Julio Liu, hello. Oh, it's nice to see you. So you're in Tokyo, I see. So welcome to Tokyo. I hope you're enjoying yourself. It's very cool. The weather here is very cool. So hopefully you can enjoy the sights of Tokyo, my dear friend. Let's see. Oh, Tim Holmes says, this is a great point. Rewatching the first two segments while simultaneously following the live stream. What's up with the women with black teeth? Just meant to be creepy or deeper meaning? That's a really good question. Actually, there's one thing I wanted to bring up before I forget. So, the ohaguro, or the blackening of teeth. I think if you look it up, you can find some information about it. But generally, this was seen, and I'm not a historian or sociologist, but generally speaking, around before the Meiji Restoration, up through the mid 1880s or 1850s or so, around that time, you had this convention, this accepted convention of women, especially in the upper class, not especially, but in the upper classes, blackening their teeth as a way of, I think, protecting, as a way of sort of dental hygiene, but also in terms of a what was considered to be a sign of, let's say, maintaining one's beauty or something like that. It's something very similar to how women, young women or women in the sort of aristocratic classes would tend to pluck out their eyebrows and then have certain eyebrow paintings, artificial paintings affixed to the area slightly above, near their foreheads, etc. And we see a lot of this, let's say, I think perhaps the most famous example of the eyebrow thing would be the character, the woman in Machiko Kyo character in Rashomon, for instance. But the blackening of teeth is also something that I think is very similar to that. So it's I think, meant to be a trait of the time. It's supposed to be one aspect of the depiction of the historical background, of the historical time in which the stories are taking place on the one hand. So on the one hand, in that sense, I think it's meant to be just an innocent detail of the historical setting, okay, on the one hand. But on the other hand, it is quite jarring. And even for, because it's a practice that's no longer being carried out here in Japan, even for Japanese people, I think, I don't have a reading of all Japanese people who've seen this film, but I do think that a number of people would react the same way. Namely, this is really visually quite weird and quite odd and almost quite unsettling. And I think we're supposed to feel that way. And why do I say that? It's because I think the two characters in particular that display this blackening teeth are the second wife, right, in the black hair story, and then the snow woman in the Woman of the Snow story. And it's the snow woman in particular, it's when she is the ghost or the snow specter at the beginning, right? It's not when she is the human version or the real, or the young woman version that Minokichi ends up marrying, right? But it's the specter version at the beginning, right? That's with her and the blackened teeth. Am I correct? And so if that's the case, then I think we have these two characters who are seen with blackened teeth, and they aren't necessarily the most sympathetic characters. And so the second wife and also the ghost version of the snow woman. And so I think we're supposed to think, at least visually, that this is an unsettling trait in this in the depiction of these characters. I would note also that the sympathetic characters, the female characters, the sympathetic female characters, aren't depicted with this kind of blackening of teeth. And that might be due, I think, primarily because they are of a different class. They are of a lower class than, let's say, the aristocratic classes that would have carried out this kind of practice. So let's say the first wife in the first story, she didn't have that blackened teeth, but she was obviously of a different class, right? The same is true for the Snow Woman when she is in human form and she is married. She doesn't have the blackening of teeth, but then again, she is also admittedly of a different class. So, and if we are to take the Snow Woman as a ghost to be, let's say, of an otherworldly quality, then I think that itself can be suggestive of a different class, right? She's not human, she's of a different class. So my point is that I think on the one hand it's just meant to evoke a certain detail in order to try to depict a sense of historical accuracy on the one hand, but on the other hand there is a visually unsettling element to it. And if we are also to extend, and this is what I'm saying now is pure conjecture on my part, but if we are to say that the Kobayashi film, the film is infused with some kind of Kobayashi social criticism of the power structures, the powers that be, and the overly rigid hierarchical systems here. I think part of that can be seen to be this notion of a criticism, even albeit a veiled one, criticism of the aristocratic structures here. And I think one of that, maybe an oblique way of criticizing that, would be to paint these characters, at least some of these characters, in, let's say, a slightly visually demonic light. And so I think that blackening of teeth adds to that overall effect. And so it's quite consistent. We can see it to be consistent with this overall view of the power structures that I think is existing here in this film. And so I think that on the one hand, therefore, it's a really important detail. I was going to talk about it, but I forgot until you reminded me, Tim, so thank you. So on the one hand, it is meant to be a historical detail that perhaps isn't meant to be thought of too much. But on the other hand, I think it is meant to be, in a certain visual poetic way, another element to that social critique of the film, or at least at the very sense, I don't think we are meant to overlook it. I think we are meant to react to it in a certain way. And the reason why is because even at the time, 1960s Japan, I don't think anyone was blackening their teeth at the time. So no one certainly does it now, at least in terms of a generally, how should I put it, in terms of something that I see, let's say, on television and magazines or anything. I don't necessarily see people blackening their teeth, and so it's not something that I understand to be something that is understood to be what it had otherwise been understood to be way back in time. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. But okay, so let's see. Okay. So I hope that's in. So, okay. So, let's see, I'm going to actually, just looking at the clock here, I don't have that much time left. So I'm going to now let's talk about In a Cup of Tea, which is the fourth and final story here. And this is a really interesting work. I was talking a little bit about the third story, Hoi to the Earless, and how I would sense that there is a kind of self-reflexivity that is beginning to come into the fore. It's not quite there yet overtly, but it's beginning to be there in terms of how different modes of storytelling seem to be on display and seem almost to be counteracting against each other. Well, I think here in the fourth story, if we're talking about the idea of writing and self-reflexivity in the film, this is the one that has it, because we have two timelines. The timeline, which is 1899 and 1900, this is the timeline where the writer and the wife and the publisher is, and then we have the narrator, which is talking about this idea of a story that seems to have been written but was written in mid-story and it wasn't finished, which I think is reflective of the actual Lafcadio Hearn story. It's considered to be one that was left without a sort of a proper denouement, as it were, and we're left with this idea of the attack of these three spectrals ghosts on the samurai, who we saw at the very beginning, who stood up, who did the unthinkable thing of standing up and then going over and getting a cup of tea and seeing the reflection of whoever it was in the liquid there. But then we have, in that fourth story, here we have an almost a wraparound story, as it were. So I spoke before about how the film KWAIDAN doesn't have a wraparound story in terms of its four stories. But within the world of this fourth story, in fact, there is a kind of wraparound story, which itself seems almost to serve as its own wraparound story for the film KWAIDAN. Because we're talking about a writer, we're talking about a story that is almost exactly paralleling the Lafcadio Hearn story that it's based upon. But then it adds something at the end which is new, which we didn't see in the Lafcadio Hearn story, namely what happens to the writer and how he is seen in his own cup, as it were, in a very that's all. That last sequence, that last shot is kind of creepy. It's almost kind of funny also in a way, in how it's very abrupt. I think the reaction of the publisher and the wife is actually much more horrifying than the actual shot itself, although the actual shot itself is very, very, very unsettling in terms of the writer, and he's almost waving at us at the camera, as it were. But my point is that almost serves as its own wraparound story, which in effect serves as the wraparound story for the film KWAIDAN. But then that leads to this idea, right, of it's, again, we talk about the act of storytelling in this film KWAIDAN. We've seen the act of storytelling and the effects of the acts of storytelling in whatever capacity that might be. Here in the fourth story, In a Cup of Tea, it's almost like the act of storytelling itself is it's almost all encompassing. It's all enveloping. It's so all enveloping that it ends up enveloping the writer himself, which is, I think, a neat little meta twist to what we've seen up to now. So it's the ultimate form of, or it's also the closest form of the expression of the power of storytelling that we have seen, because it's almost so closely linked with Lafcadio Hearn himself. I think the author could almost be, it could almost have been Lafcadio Hearn himself in an interesting sort of way. I think it would have been really interesting had it actually been depicted to be Lafcadio Hearn, but oh well, I think that would have gone somewhere completely different. But my point, however, is that we have here not only horror elements, and not only metaphysical, not only elements that layer in on each other in terms of temporal use of time and space, also use of visual elements that recall things that we've seen before, the use of ghost specters reflected in pools of water or pools of liquid. We've seen that in the first story. The idea of specters coming, warriors coming to battle in a certain sense. We've seen that in the third story in terms of the samurai class and how they are depicted, and their sort of foibles and human errors that are on display. We kind of saw that in this, not in terms of the samurai class, we saw that in the third story, but human errors and that lead to certain consequences. We saw that in the second story here as well. So there are a lot of connective strands at play here. And then also the canted angles and the striking use of movement here, which we've seen, of course, on display elsewhere. But I think ultimately here we are talking about a story within a story, and we are talking about a story within a story that ends up enveloping that first story. Which, if we are then to think about the power of storytelling, I think that's the ultimate metaphor to have, and I think that's the great way in which to end the film, which is this take on the power of telling the tale, and so much so that it can overtake the one telling it. So and there's an interesting, even further meta element to this, which I didn't even think about until I heard the Stephen Prince commentary, which is this: if we were to even to take it one step further outside the realm of the film, closer to the realm of reality, one extra layer, as it were. Remember where this comes in Kobayashi's career. This was a very expensive film, and according to Stephen Prince, it nearly bankrupted him, and also it apparently it hindered him from Kobayashi from being able to be accepted by other producers and stuff to make films going forward. And so in many ways in many ways, according to Stephen Prince, after this film, Kobayashi found it a little bit more difficult to be able to make more films, at least in the immediate future after KWAIDAN. And so, in many ways, there is a really even further meta element to the fourth story and to the filmmaking, because if we are to see the fourth story as being an artist in mid art production, as it were, and not finishing, as it were. In a similar, almost meta way, it's almost like this work KWAIDAN is, we find it in the context of Kobayashi's career, where he's caught, and once he's done with it, he is caught and he can't produce anymore. And so he's almost like the writer in the story, and he's almost caught in his own creation, in the sense that he can't produce anything further beyond that. And so, and that's a really, and the commentary actually kind of ends rather abruptly on that point. And so even the commentary itself seems to end in mid-sentence without necessarily having a kind of follow-through. So there's even a further meta element to this, not only in terms of Kobayashi, but in terms of Stephen Prince himself. I think it's really fascinating, actually. And in fact, maybe that might be true in the way I might end this conversation with this live stream. So perhaps these things come in cycles, and perhaps I should be careful when I drink my cup of tea after this live stream is over. I don't want to see any visions of specters there. But in any event, my friends, I would strongly recommend listening to the Stephen Prince commentary on that particular story. It's really, really great, and it's quite illuminating. An example of which being the little anecdote that I tried to express here. But in any event, my friends, let's see. Let me now go to the live stream chat, and then we can go from there. So, okay, just going over here. Okay. Okay, again, a great conversation here. I'm so happy. This is lovely. Absolutely lovely. Okay. All right. Let's see. And I'm just now catching up, and I just was talking about. Oh, Retro Player 72. Maybe you're off. You signed off already, but anyway, my belated greetings. I hope you're well. Take care, and talk to you very soon, my friend. Let's see. Oh, Paula, very nice, thank you. So, Paula, you were answering Tim's comment about the blackened teeth, and you referred to the commentary as well. So, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Yes, and just Cooper Clever 1972 and JR62 says yes. Takashi Shimura is in the film. It's really great. He's in the third segment he's bald, and this is 1965. So this is about 10 years after Seven Samurai, where he was also portraying a character who is very noticeably bald for a very important reason in that film, by the way. But Stephen Prince also makes great comments about how Takashi Shimura looks really quite. He seems to be full of life in this film, and his look almost recalls Kanbei, his character's name in Seven Samurai, in certain ways that he's shot. It's really interesting. He also says, Stephen Prince says, it's interesting how Kobayashi shoots with his camera. He shoots Shimura in a way that makes him look more full of life than the way that Takashi Shimura seemed to appear around the same time in other Kurosawa films. This is 1965, so in the early 60s, he would have appeared in films like Yojimbo and Sanjuro, etc. And admittedly, I think he doesn't seem to, or his characters there are somewhat minor characters, and it's a minor character here as well, but for some reason, maybe it's the gravity of the role that he's playing, I don't know, but he seems to have a lot of life here, the way he's depicted, so it's really lovely to see him. And of course, the visual comparison between him and his performance from the Seven Samurai 10 years earlier. It's only 10 years earlier. It boggles the mind to think about that. But anyway, yes, Takashi Shimura. Let's see. Okay. All right, so Max Hammerstein says, hello. Hello, Daisuke. I'm a huge fan of KWAIDAN. but have yet to get into Kobayashi's other films. What would you recommend as a good starting place for the rest of his filmography? I don't. I mean, I suppose. I mean, I don't want to get into too much, but I suppose the place to go probably would be Harakiri, and then the Human Condition, perhaps Harakiri next. In terms of its the fact that it's really famous, and also because it's I think very accessible. It's very easy to get. It's not out of print. You can get it on a on a Blu-ray or something outside of Japan with considerable ease, I would think. So that's one to get in. It's really good. I hope you enjoy your Kobayashi journey, my friend. Let's see. Okay, and let's see. Keeping going here. Jambo Shango and the Randy Moles show, hello. Movie show, hello, my friend. It's nice to see you. I hope you're well. It's always nice to hear from you. Let's see. Congratulations to England, by the way, and the rugby. I don't know if you like rugby, but here rugby is quite. Japan is somewhat in a rugby fever because of its success with the Rugby World Cup. So I'm not too. I don't know too much about rugby, but it's quite. Obviously now very popular at the moment because of the success the team has been having so far. But anyway, that's completely off topic. I apologize. Let's see. All right. Mo says, hello, I'm going to be in Tokyo this coming Thursday. You should do a meetup. I don't usually do meetups. I do meet some people occasionally who come to Tokyo. So I'm not against that at all. So it's nice. It's just that I have work on weekdays, and so sometimes it's a little bit difficult. In fact, someone reached out to me earlier in the week, and we tried to arrange a meetup, but unfortunately we couldn't schedule it because of my work schedule and because of his travel schedule and stuff. But I'm always open to meetups, so people can contact me and see what happens. But anyone who's in Tokyo, please let me know, and of course I would be very happy to. Tim says, I believe Lafcadio died in the early 1900s, so no, he was not alive at the time of the film. Yes, so no, I should clarify. I didn't mean to have Lafcadio Hearn himself depicted, act in the film, but I meant to have an actor depicting the personage of Lafcadio Hearn, because the author that is depicted in the fourth story it doesn't look like a Lafcadio Hearn type of person, right? So my comment was not to have the actual person of Lafcadio Hearn be in the film, but to have a character that would recall or resemble Lafcadio Hearn and to represent Lafcadio Hearn. So that would be a kind of stand-in for us. That's what I meant. Yes, I know the biographical history of that and when he lived. So, that it wouldn't have made sense for him to himself to have been in the film in 1965. No, so my earlier comment was about having an actor portray Lafcadio Hearn. So, let's see. Kubrick Lover 1972 says, sorry if I'm leaving too many comments. No, not at all, my friend. You're leaving a lot of great comments. Keep them coming. That more the merrier, I say. Let's see. And here, Paul Emery says, Daisuke, I didn't comment today. I love KWAIDAN, and I find it mesmerizing. Your presentation was fascinating and illuminating. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. My next viewing of KWAIDAN will be even more enjoyable. I hope so. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Cephaloclod, I'm going to get that pronunciation incorrect. Cephaloclod. Hey Daisuke, saw you were live and thought I'd just stop by and say, hey, hello, thank you very much. Thank you. I hope you're having a good day. My girlfriend and I love your videos. I'm not a big movie watching type gal, but she's a huge fan. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Wow. We usually watch your videos together right before bed, but I had to stop by to say hello. Well, cheers to you and cheers to your girlfriend. I hope you are well. Both of you are well. And greetings to you from Tokyo. It's really, thank you very much. Completely unnecessary, of course, because I know you're busy and maybe, I don't know where you are in the world, but maybe you are getting ready for bedtime. I'm not sure. The time difference and all and stuff. But if it is late where you are, I really, you didn't have to do it, but you took the time to make a message. So thank you very much. That's very kind of you. That's really kind of you. And please feel free to leave comments anytime. I'm always happy to talk with you and others. So about your favorite films and stuff. So if you have any recommendations for me to what to watch, you and your girlfriend, if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. I'm always up for a good going off very soon. But unless, I'll leave it open for another maybe few minutes if anyone wants to chime in with some last minute comments the like. But in the meantime, let me just say as a concluding comment here, I would want to say that I think that a lot can be said about this film that is not, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I have to talk just one more thing before I forget, because I didn't mention it, but I was talking about the writing, the storytelling aspects of the film, and I sort of alluded earlier to the fact that the opening credits were I think it's shot through water, and it's like colored ink. Oh, there's a siren here, but there's colored ink that's shown flowing through water and stuff. And I love that motif because not only is it suggestive of the color scheme and the way in which things sort of float and kind of ghost spectral sort of things that are shot in vivid reds and blues and vivid colors. So it's very indicative of the film itself. But also I love the fact that it's ink, or it seems to be ink, or colored ink, and we see ink on display, of course, quite directly in Hoichi the Earless with the writing on the body, and the reds and the blacks, of course. But also, I love, there's a moment in the opening titles where it doesn't go forward, but it goes in reverse. And I love that. I love that idea of going in reverse. And in fact, I think the timing is such that it goes, I think it's blue or green, I forget, but it goes in reverse. And once it goes in reverse and it turns into clean water, then it goes into, I think, the first opening credit devoted to the stories. I think it's the black hair story, I think. And so I love that because it's almost like the ink is, I mean, it only happens for one moment and it goes back to the forward motion for the rest of the credits for the stories. But my point is that I love that motif because it's almost like the ink is acting up, it has its own life, and it's almost collecting and gathering up in a way that it's going to be gathered up out of the water, and it's going to be used as the ink to write the stories of the segments that we are about to see. So I love that. It's almost like the ink is almost alive in a sense, and it almost adds this to this idea of the active participation element in storytelling, and almost like the storytelling itself seems to be its own character, and we see that on display in particular in A Cup of Tea. And I just love that extra got connective tissue, as it were, even at the very opening sequence or the opening credits. So really great. I love that. I absolutely love it. I just wanted to mention that before I completed my conversation here. But in the meantime, my friends, let me say that the film KWAIDAN, I think, is one that I don't think it's overt. It's in-your-face horror film. It's not a horror film in that sense, but it is filled with more quieter senses of dread, of longing, of regret, of mistakes, and of sort of almost happenstance and bad luck. It's not completely bloodless. Of course, there are a lot of bloody things that happen here, and there are a lot of creepy images on display. but there are also a lot of beautiful images on display. And I think it's an interesting, not a conundrum, but it's an interesting concept to consider. Namely, we can also find beauty in things that are ugly, or find beauty in things that are terrible and regretful and lead to sadness, and this sort of idea, which on the surface might seem to be contradictory or self-contradictory, but I think on the whole there is a sort of wonderful, almost, how should I put it? There's almost this, maybe it goes back to sort of a Buddhist theological viewpoint, this idea of the impermanence of things, and how things that maybe moments of happiness are just fleeting and not lasting, and it's that loss that occurs afterward that is the ultimate sort of horror or element. And I'm not sure, I'm not considering this to be a Buddhist film, don't get me wrong, but it's just that kind of philosophy that I think is most definitely on display, that helps to form these levels of narrative arc, thematic arc, setting up contrasts that will lead to downfalls of characters, or that will lead to moments of longing and regret and yearning and loss. And those are the underlying elements that I think prop up this film and help this film shoot it off into the stratosphere in terms of its overall effectiveness. This is a long film, but I think it goes by very quickly, as I've mentioned before. It is a beautiful, colorful, lovely display. Its sounds and musical tones are vivid and amazing. Its performances are stellar. Its sets are just incredibly filled with depth, three-dimensional depth, and intricacies that you just have to pause the Blu-ray and just take a look at all the details that are there. But still give way to this sense of this idea of the endeavor of human creation. And I think ultimately what we're dealing with here is, whether it be storytelling or whether it be the craft of filmmaking or cinema, we're dealing here with something that is truly a remarkable example of an endeavor of human creation. And so my hat's off, of course, to Masaki Kobayashi and cast and crew for creating at this point in time, mid-1960s, something that is, I think, theatrical and groundbreaking, both traditional and experimental. It has everything, the yings and yangs of cinema, as it were. It's all enveloped in this masterpiece of a film that is KWAIDAN from 1965. So anyway, it concludes my comments on the film. So for now, anyway, so let me just now go to the comments here, and then after I see the comments and say hello, I'll call it a day. So, or call it a morning, because it's now what, 8:15 in the morning here. So it's cool enough outside. So I'm hopefully will take my dog for a walk. So let's see, so just going back from before, so great conversations from all here. I want to thank all of you, as always, just giving me great questions. Kubrick Lover 1972 in particular, thank you. Your question, more the merrier, my friends. I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer to any sort of full ability. I know my answers were very lacking, so I hope you can forgive me, but your questions were great. And Salafoclod says, I generally have bad taste in movies, but if you haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse, please do. It's a monument to animated features and achievement of the modern age. Okay, Into the Spider-Verse, great. Okay, excellent. I saw the let's see, how should I explain it? I saw it on the airplane. But I didn't finish it because the flight was stopped. But my son, who is now 3, he is very much into Spider-Man, and I think he saw the entire film, or at least saw bits of it on the plane when he was next to me. And so I was watching 2 films. What did I see? I saw Aloha, and I saw oh gosh, I'm blanking on the title. It's still early. The Denis Villeneuve film with Amy Adams. Someone remind me, please. What's that? Oh gosh, what is it? What is it? What's that film? I'm gonna. Gosh, what's that film? Why did I remember Aloha? That's that's the lesser of the films. I don't want to remember that film. I don't really like that film very much. Gosh, what is that film? Why did I forget? What are the Arrival? Sorry, thank you. Arrival. So I saw Arrival, and then I saw Aloha, but I saw part of Into the Spider-Verse, but I wasn't able to finish it. But my son, I think, saw it, and he really enjoyed it. So I think I'm going to try to maybe watch it again from the beginning. But okay, I will definitely catch up with it now with your suggestions. So that's great. And Cooper Glover 1972 says, Daisuke, when you mentioned the beginning credits of KWAIDAN, that make me think of a dolly shot in the water in Tarkovsky's Stalker. Yes, I mean, there are great moments of shots of water. I mean, if you want to talk about shots of water, you can look at shots of water in the beginning of the third story, Hoichi the Earless, and we can recall scenes of how water flows and stuff, and it recalls shots of water that we've seen in Tarkovsky works, Stalker for one, Solaris for another, and I think if we then that leads us around, if we go through, we can go from there to Solaris, and then if we go from Solaris, I think we can go even to Dreams, Kurosawa's Dreams, and there's a very famous shot of water toward the end there, with the final dream segment there. But anyway, let's see. Max Hammerstein says, hello Daisuke, I'd love to see a video on the Taiwanese New Wave. With one day, perhaps. I'm not sure. Again, I'd love, again, so much things I'd love to do, so little time. I always feel bad because I get these great suggestions from people. You should do a video on this. You should do a video on that. I always agree, but it's just a matter of finding time. And I have to. Even with these YouTube things, I have to find certain times of the day where I can do that. Unfortunately, it's, unfortunately for YouTube, but fortunately for other things, I suppose. But, unfortunately for YouTube things, I'm not able to focus on YouTube every single, during the day. I have to wake up early, or I have to stay up late at night and do things. And so that tends to limit me in my pace. I'm very, very slow. And so there are a lot of things that I want to be able to do, but unfortunately, it's hard for me to find the time these days. But I am trying my very best. So, and I did talk about Edward Yang, but I do know that Edward Yang is only one component of a great thing that we saw starting from the 1980s in Taiwan. And so I've never been to Taiwan, in fact, but I'm a great admirer of the cinema. I love the cinema of Taiwan. It's really some of the best in the world. And so one of these days, perhaps. It's a really great suggestion, Max, so I'll definitely take it to heart. So Spider Pig, was that, someone mentioned Spider Pig? Was that a reference to The Simpsons? I don't know. I did see the Simpsons movie in the theater when it was released, however many years ago. So that was I think the last time I was into the Simpsons, actually. But I was really into the Simpsons up to then. But then afterwards, I think it was around the time that the Simpsons movie was released in theaters, and I went to the theater, I think, to see it. And then maybe it was around that time that I started to watch less and less TV, and then I moved back to Japan. And so I think I don't know any of the recent episodes or the seasons of The Simpsons. I do know, generally speaking, that The Simpsons has gone down in quality. At least that's the general critical consensus. But I think I stopped watching it around season, was it 10 or 11 or something like that? Maybe that was around. It was really great, but ever since then I haven't seen it. But that's just because I haven't been able to. But anyway, if your comment on Spider Pig wasn't about The Simpsons, then I apologize for going on about The Simpsons, even though the comment wasn't about The Simpsons. Let's see, and I think Daisuke Kubrick Lover 1972 says, I think Daisuke did a video on EE. Yes, thank you for remembering. Yes, I did a number of videos on EE. I also did a number of videos on A Brighter Summer Day. I went through the entire filmography of films directed by Edward Yang, starting with That Day on the Beach, and then I went to other films like Taipei Story and Terrorizers and A Brighter Summer Day. And I actually went to the films that are really difficult to get, like Confusion and Mahjong, because I was able to get the Japanese DVDs of those films before they went out of print. And then I followed up with EE, of course. So that was a really great time, and that was also another way in which I was able to get into Taiwanese cinema. But okay, so okay, yes. All right, there's a terrible echo in this. Okay, so oh, have I seen The Touch of Zen by King Hu? Yes, I have. It's really great. And Max says, "Thank you so much for the responses, Daisuke. I'm incredibly grateful for any video you put." Oh no, thank you for your suggestion. And again, I'm just sorry that I'm not able to I'm not able to make more videos, I suppose. I'm very grateful for people who are responding to them. It's just I'm just talking here. I'm just talking by myself in the room. There's no one here. It's me and it's my iPhone. So I'm very grateful for anyone who's out there who's willing to listen. So thank you very much for, and not only that, but also make suggestions on top of that. Who could ask for anything more? I think it's great. So thank you very much for always watching and supporting. It's really lovely. So thank you for that. And again, if you have any suggestions, of course, I will do my best to listen. And actually realizing them, again, it's not for anything except that it's just time and being able to do everything that I want to do. So, so much to do, so little time. So, to paraphrase, kind of paraphrase Poison Ivy from Batman and Robin. But anyway, my friends, let me just end there. So, that is KWAIDAN from 1965, so Kobayashi's KWAIDAN, a real great work of art. So thank you very much for all of you who participated and who watched the film, or watched part of the film. I know it's a difficult film because it's long, so I appreciate any effort you gave, even if it was just 5 minutes or 10 minutes here and there. I know it's hard, so we are all busy, I know. So thank you very much for putting in the effort. It's really great. And afterwards, if you want to continue your discussions with KWAIDAN, Kobayashi, etc., you can leave comments here. You talk amongst yourself, have discussions there. I'm going to be going soon, but your conversations hopefully will be ongoing and will continue going forward. So I encourage that. Of course, the more the merrier, my friends. The more the merrier. And if you want to make, I always invite people. You can leave comments on the channel. If you want to do your own videos about responses to this, or maybe any films that you've seen, heck, that would be absolutely fantastic. I would love to see that stuff. Some people have asked me advice for YouTube videos, and I'm not really the best person to ask for advice for YouTube videos because I'm not really that good with this sort of thing. But I would say that anyone who wants to give it a try, give it a try. And if you want to talk about KWAIDAN, if you want to talk about other films that you feel need more attention, etc., great. I think the more voices out there, the merrier. And you don't have to worry about if you can if you're concerned about comments, or if you're concerned about thumbs up or thumbs down or something like that, you can always adjust the functions. You can always disable those comments or disable those functions, that sort of thing. In other words, you can always do things at a comfort level that is fitting for what you are comfortable with. You can set your privacy settings, etc. So and things like that. So I know some people sometimes send me video responses, but set to private mode. So in other words, they are only, I can only see them if I'm actually sent the link by the video maker. And so I know some people do that. I know sometimes there's a little bit of trepidation about making videos on YouTube, and I totally get that. I absolutely get that. But whatever your comfort level is, my friends, my point is that if you want to reach out to me, or if you want to try to make your own videos, make your own blogs, or that sort of thing, outside of our own conversation, but on your own, doing your own thing, as it were, the more the merrier, my friends. You do what you want to do. I think the space is big enough for everyone to have his or her own say. There's no, I have no sort of ownership or anything over any of these discussions of films. It's all out in the open, and the more the merrier, my friends. So that's my general sort of encouragement for anyone who's still thinking about that. And last, I want to say that next week, next Sunday will be Night of the Living Dead, yes. So it'll be Night of the Living Dead, and that's next Sunday, 6 a.m. Tokyo time. So that'll be very exciting. So I look forward to talking with you about that. Also, there is a film poll. There are 2 polls out, I think. The first one is I'm asking people to give me their favorite Criterion titles, their top 10 or 10 favorite Criterion titles. There's a video that I put up, and if you want to leave your top 10 or favorite Criterion, top or 10 favorite Criterion titles, you just leave a comment there and I will count it, and I will count up all the poll results, and I will make a video announcing what the top Criterion titles are, and I might even try to release that list itself. So I've already made it for the most part. There are still a couple new entries that I have to figure in, but I've compiled the list up to, let's say, last Thursday, and oh gosh, it is a really interesting list. I cannot wait to tell you what the top titles are. I did mention before that there were some close contests here. And there's a pretty close contest for what's going to be the top favorite one. So I have a feeling it could change depending on if we get more people participating or not. I think so far we have over 100 people who've participated, which is a lot. I was hoping for 100, but I wasn't expecting over 100. So, and it's still open until the end of November. So there's still like a month and some change left. So hopefully maybe if the Barnes & Noble sale goes on in November, and maybe that might get some more excitement generated for Criterion. You know, there's a lot of excitement during Criterion sales months, and so perhaps more people might have their focus on Criterion. So hopefully maybe other titles will be out by then, you know, the Godzilla set and things like that. So maybe that might change the conversation slightly going into November. But it's open up. The poll is open until November 30th, and then I'll try to make a video sometime in December with the announcement about that, about the results. Then there is another poll, which is, if I check right now what the status is of that, it's the poll that I have on the, what do you call it, on the community tab. And the community tab poll is where I ask you for what film you want to discuss for Sunday, for the middle of November. And I have 5 films up there: Akira, Goldfinger, North by Northwest, Pulp Fiction, and Taxi Driver. And I ask you to vote for what film you want to discuss. Now that'll be open until the end of this month. And so I think at the moment, it's Taxi Driver, followed by Akira. So that's a pretty close contest here, but there's still a little bit of time. So if you haven't voted for what film you want to discuss, please go into the community tab and please select which of the 5 you want to discuss. There's certainly, I tried to pick some variety, and these are titles that are Criterion titles, but they were Criterion Laserdisc titles, and so it'll be interesting to focus on those titles which aren't necessarily in the current DVD Blu-ray catalog of the Criterion collection. So trying to give a little bit more variety than what I'm usually used to doing, but hopefully this will work out. So if it's Taxi Driver, oh gosh, that's a really exciting film. Really exciting film. I haven't, oh gosh. I remember there was a period in my life when I was seeing that film almost daily, and I took a. I don't want to. I'm getting ahead of myself. It could, maybe it's another film besides Taxi Driver. So, even in that time, I would be so thrilled with any of these films. But in any event, my friends, if you're interested in the community tab, please feel free to check that out. Okay, so last but not least, I will go to the chat, and then after that, I will leave you. So thank you very much. So last minute chat comments, and then we will be on our way. So, as always, I am very slow with my computer skills, but oh well, c'est la vie. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so okay, let's see. Tim says, you're doing more than enough, Daisuke. We all appreciate your dedication and tremendous efforts. Oh gosh, thank you very much. But really, I must say, I'm not, I don't feel like I'm putting in that much effort, actually. I wish I could do more, but, oh gosh. Yes, but thank you very much for your kind words as always, my friend. My friend, it's really, really great. So, let's see. Aaron pins cat and Daisuke's dog together on a stream. Well, that would be an interesting collaboration. I love his live streams, by the way. Aaron's live streams are really remarkable. The wealth of knowledge that he has in his collection is just out of this world. Really, really fantastic. And let's see. Have you heard about Joker and the comparisons to Taxi Driver? I haven't seen Joker yet. I've heard all the news about Joker and King of Comedy and Scorsese and Marvel films and all that. I've heard, I know all the news, but the thing about Rotten Tomatoes and audience scores and Joker and all that, and I know all that stuff, but I just haven't seen the film yet. So I don't know if I'll be able to see it. Actually, it's one of the things that's one of my great weaknesses, is my inability to be able to go out and watch films in the theater. And all things film, yes, we need a live stream on The Wizard of Oz. Come on, you know you want to do it. Actually, my daughter she's one of there's a school sort of event that's going to happen, and it's a Wizard of Oz event. And so my daughter has been watching The Wizard of Oz with her friends at school, and she's been practicing the songs. And so we've been over the last month or so, I've been Wizard of Oz'd. So I would love, that would be really great. That would be really good. Maybe my daughter could join, and she could share her thoughts about The Wizard of Oz, because she really loves it, and she's singing and she actually has a little speech during the event where she has to talk, and it's a little play, I think, and she's maybe a narrator, and she's talking about setting up the scene, and she has to talk about Dorothy, and she's going through, and she meets the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion, and they're singing. Then Dorothy and her friends are going to sing and dance their way through the land of Oz. And so I've had Wizard of Oz on the brain for quite some time, actually. So I would love to have a Wizard of Oz live stream. Gosh, I'm so bad with technical things, but maybe we could do all things film, or Ian and Daisuke's, maybe a collaboration about that. If again, I'm very terrible with technical details, but if you can connect up a live chat between you and me, and then we can have a live, like an actual live feed and then a live chat, and then we could talk about The Wizard of Oz. I'd be so open for that. I would definitely be open for that, and to have you and your expertise of the film I think that would be really fascinating. So maybe we should talk afterwards, and maybe we can discuss that. Oh, by the way, I did get your message about earlier, so thank you very much. I should say that it's been a little bit difficult with getting responding to messages. I'm usually very late over the weekend, so I apologize if I don't respond to messages or comments over the weekend. But usually I have to spend time away from the computer. So that's why I don't tend to respond to messages and comments over the weekend, but I'll try to do so maybe later today or definitely by tomorrow. So that's for sure. But Ian, if you want to talk, let's talk maybe sometime later. Maybe we can schedule something about the Wizard of Oz. I'd be really up for that. So anyway, my friends, let's see. So that's it, and. Okay, the last minute. Okay. Yes. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. So MBP says, thought this was worth mentioning. Ken Russell's The Devils is available on the Criterion channel right now as a part of a double feature with Black Narcissus. Whoa, mind blown. That's amazing. So I understand the Criterion channel version of The Devils, while it isn't the real version that we would love to see one day, don't know if we'll ever be able to see it, it's still probably the best version that we will ever be able to see, at least at this point in time. I think it's the same as the BFI DVD version of The Devils, if I'm not mistaken. So we don't get all of the stuff that's supposed to be in there, but we get most of it, and so it's better than not having the film at all. And so The Devils, I've said in some videos, maybe not in all, but I've said in some videos that The Devils is one of, I think, my favorite films ever. And it's a film that I never grow tired of. It's a film that I feel like it still has so much more to offer because, as I said, if we are able to get the real version of that one day, that would be one of the, I think, the greatest moments in my life as a film goer. I'm not sure if I'll be able, I don't know if I would ever, oh gosh, man, just thinking about The Devils makes me so excited on the one hand, makes me so angry on the other, the way in which, okay, never mind. I love that film so much, but that's great news, MVP, so thank you very much. That is great. But anyway, oh gosh, yes, and oh gosh, if The Devils is on the Criterion channel, and if I'm doing my live chats based on Criterion films, then in fact The Devils is indeed a Criterion film, and so it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility that we could do The Devils as a live stream film club chat. That would be really interesting. Let me think about that, and then we can go from there. But yeah, that might be very interesting indeed. Let's think about that. So The Devils and the Wizard of Oz. So let's think about that as possibilities going forward. So anyway, my friends, I will leave you, and please be well. Have a really great rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much again, and cheers. All right, so thank you very much, my friends. And we are out of here. So I hope you're well, and I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Thank you very much for your discussion on this film, KWAIDAN, and talk to you very soon, my dear friends. It's always a pleasure, and please be well. Take good care of yourselves. Cheers. All right. So see you again. All right.